The rain had been falling on Marlow and Whitfield since before dawn, and by the time Eleanor Vance climbed the 17 granite steps to the firm's entrance, her coat was soaked through at the shoulders, and the umbrella she'd bought for £4 at the station had already surrendered 2 of its ribs to the wind. She did not hurry. She had learned a long time ago that hurrying told people something about you that you could not later take back, and this morning of all mornings she intended to give away nothing. The lobby smelled of wet wool and expensive coffee. Behind the reception desk, a young man she didn't recognize glanced up, took in her damp coat and her sensible shoes and the canvas bag over her shoulder, and made the small recalculation she'd watched 1,000 people make. Not important, he returned to his screen. "Eleanor Vance," she said, "I have a 9 o'clock with Mr. Whitfield. Do you have an appointment reference?" "I have his email." He typed something, frowned, typed again. "I'm not seeing, oh, here, you're the, he stopped. Whatever the note beside her name said, he decided not to read it aloud. "4th floor, someone will collect you." She sat in the low gray chair by the window and watched the rain slide down the glass and did not take out her phone, because she already knew everything her phone could tell her, and because she wanted to remember exactly how this room looked before it became a room she would never be invited into again. Nobody came for 11 minutes. When the woman finally appeared, heels, tailored charcoal, a lanyard that said Priya Sadler, estate coordination, she wore the particular smile of someone who has been told to be pleasant to a person she has been told does not matter. "Miss Vance, so sorry to keep you. Shall we?" The conference room on the 4th floor had a view of the river and a table long enough to seat 20. Only 4 chairs were occupied. Eleanor recognized 2 of the faces. The third, at the head of the table, was Gerald Whitfield himself, 71, silver-haired, with the soft, ruined handsomeness of a man who had spent 40 years being agreed with. The fourth was a boy. The boy was perhaps 8. He sat swallowed by a chair built for adults, his feet not reaching the floor, a school jumper 2 sizes too big pulled down over his hands so that only his fingertips showed. He had a cowlick that no one had thought to fix that morning and eyes that moved around the room too quickly, the way eyes move when a child has learned that rooms full of quiet adults are rooms where bad things are decided. "Thomas," Eleanor said, and the boy looked up, and for 1 second his whole face opened. "Aunt Nell." "That's enough," said the woman beside him, Caroline Ashworth, Thomas's father's cousin, and Eleanor now understood the reason she had been summoned. Caroline wore grief like a well-chosen accessory. "Thomas, we don't interrupt." Whitfield cleared his throat. "Miss Vance, thank you for coming. Please sit, this won't take long." She sat. She did not take off her coat. "You'll be aware," Whitfield began, "of the tragic circumstances. Daniel and Margaret." A respectful pause, the kind of pause that costs nothing. "The accident on the A34 was a terrible loss. To the family, and I'm sure to yourself as a friend of the family." "Margaret was my sister," Eleanor said. A small silence. Whitfield glanced down at his papers as though they might correct her. "Half-sister, I believe the record shows." "She was my sister." "Of course." He moved on. This was, she understood, how it would go. Every fact she offered would be received, examined for inconvenience, and quietly filed somewhere it could do no harm. "The purpose of today is to settle the question of Thomas's guardianship and the administration of the estate, which, as you may or may not know, is considerable." Considerable. Eleanor almost smiled. Daniel Vance had sold his software company at 34 and spent the 14 years since turning the proceeds into the kind of fortune that lawyers described with careful vagueness because the true number made people behave strangely. Considerable. Yes. "The will," Whitfield continued, "names Thomas as sole heir, which is straightforward. Less straightforward is the matter of who administers the estate until he reaches his majority and who assumes his day-to-day care." He steepled his fingers. "Daniel and Margaret, it seems, updated their arrangements some years ago and did not revisit them. The named guardian is you, Miss Vance." The boy's head came up again. "However," Whitfield said, and there it was, the however, the hinge on which the whole morning turned. "The estate's trustees have reservations, serious ones, which is why Mrs. Ashworth is here, and why we've asked you to come in person rather than settle this by correspondence." "What reservations?" Eleanor said. It was not a question, she already knew. Caroline Ashworth took this as her cue. She had clearly prepared. "Eleanor, nobody doubts you care for Thomas. We can all see that." A glance at the boy, warm as a photograph of warmth. "But caring isn't the same as being equipped. You live in a one-bedroom flat in Reading. You work, forgive me, what is it now?" "I clean." The word landed on the table and sat there. "You clean," Caroline repeated gently, as though helping a witness through difficult testimony. "Offices at night, I believe, which is honest work and no one here is looking down on it. But we're talking about a child who will one day inherit." She let the sentence trail into the vagueness Whitfield had used a great deal. "A child who needs stability, schooling, structure, security, not a spare room and a night shift schedule." Thomas had gone very still. Eleanor had seen him go still like that once before, at the funeral, when a woman from the church had bent down and told him his mummy and daddy were angels now. And he had understood, in the way children understand the things adults don't mean them to, that he was being handed a story instead of the truth. "You want to be his guardian," Eleanor said to Caroline. "I want what's best for him. Marcus and I, we have the house in Surrey, the garden, good schools 10 minutes away, my mother nearby. We can give him a life, Eleanor. And yes, if it helps him, of course we'd be willing to take on the responsibility of the estate as well. Somebody has to manage it properly. These things don't manage themselves." And there it was, not the boy, the estate. The boy was the door, and the estate was the room. Eleanor looked at Whitfield. "You said the trustees have reservations. You're a trustee." "I am." "So is Mrs. Ashworth's husband, I'd imagine, Marcus Ashworth. Daniel mentioned him, something about the venture fund." For the first time, something flickered across Whitfield's composed face. "Mr. Ashworth is one of 3 trustees, yes. I fail to see the relevance." "No," Eleanor said, "I don't suppose you do." She was given, in the end, a document to sign. It was described to her as a voluntary acknowledgment, a statement that she recognized the estate trustee's authority to petition for a variation of guardianship, that she would not obstruct proceedings, that she understood she lacked the material means to provide for the minor's welfare, and consented to a supervised transition of care to Mr. and Mrs. Ashworth pending the court's ratification. They had brought a pen. It was a nice pen. "Take your time," Caroline said, in a voice that meant don't. Eleanor read every word. She read it the way she read everything now, slowly, twice, the way she had trained herself to read after the year she no longer talked about, the year that had ended with her walking away from a building not unlike this one, and taking a job that asked nothing of her but her hands and her silence and the graveyard hours. She read the clause about material means. She read the clause about supervised transition. She read the small paragraph near the bottom, the one written in the flat, dead language of people who expect never to be challenged, granting the trustees sole discretionary authority over all estate assets, holdings, and instruments during the period of administration. All instruments. She turned that phrase over. Then she set the pen down, uncapped, beside the document and folded her hands. "I won't be signing this today," she said. Caroline's smile didn't move, but something behind it did. "Eleanor, I understand this is emotional, but refusing to sign only drags things out. It only makes it harder on Thomas. Is that what you want? A long, ugly court fight, lawyers, a little boy in the middle of it?" She leaned forward, confiding. "You'll lose, you do see that. A single woman, no assets, a flat you barely make rent on, against a stable married couple with the trustees' support. No court in the country would choose the cleaner over the Over the what? Eleanor said. Caroline stopped. Finish it, Eleanor said very quietly. Over the what? The room was silent except for the rain. Thomas was watching his aunt with an expression Eleanor would think about for a long time afterward. Not hope, exactly. Hope was too soft a word. It was the look of a child watching to see whether the one adult who had never lied to him was going to lie now, when it would have been so much easier to. She did not. I'm going to tell you what's going to happen, Eleanor said, and she said it without heat, without threat, in the level tone she used to use in rooms very like this one in the life she no longer discussed. You're going to petition the court. That's your right. And I'm going to respond. That's mine. And then we're going to find out whether this is a decision about what's best for Thomas, she looked at Whitfield, or a decision about who controls 40 million pounds. Because those are two different questions, Mr. Whitfield, and I don't think you've been asking the first one. Whitfield's face had gone carefully blank. I'd be cautious, Miss Vance, about implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm telling you I read the document, all of it, including the part your coordinator hoped I'd sign past. She stood and picked up her canvas bag and looked down the long table at the boy. Thomas, get your coat. Caroline was on her feet. He is not leaving with Gerald, tell her. She has no. I am his named guardian, Eleanor said, under a valid will which none of you has yet moved to overturn, which means as of this moment I have every legal right to him and you have a petition you haven't filed. Thomas, coat. The boy slid off the enormous chair. His feet hit the floor. He crossed the room, past his aunt, who did not in the end reach out to stop him, because there were 3 lawyers watching and Caroline Ashworth never did anything that 3 lawyers were watching, and he put his small hand into Eleanor's, and his fingers were cold. At the door she turned back once. You looked at the flat, she said to Caroline, the night shift, the 4-pound umbrella, and you decided you knew everything about me you needed to know. She almost smiled. You should have looked harder. And then she and the boy walked out into the rain, and the door closed behind them, and up on the 4th floor 3 very expensive people sat in a very quiet room, and none of them yet understood that the woman who cleaned their offices at night had, some years ago, in another name and another life, built the very trust structure whose fine print they had just tried to make her sign away. The rain had followed them all the way to Reading. By the time the train pulled into the station, Thomas had fallen asleep against her arm, his mouth slightly open, one hand still curled in the fabric of her sleeve as though even asleep he was checking she was there. Eleanor did not move him. She sat with the dead weight of him against her side and watched the wet fields go by, and did the arithmetic she had been avoiding all morning. 40 million pounds, 3 trustees, a petition that would be filed within the week, and her with 211 pounds in her current account and a shift starting at 10 that night. She could win this. That was the strange, cold certainty sitting under everything else. She knew she could win it, but winning it would mean opening a door she had spent 6 years welding shut, and once it was open she would not be able to close it again, and everyone on the other side of it would come looking for her. Thomas stirred. Are we there? Nearly. Is Aunt Caroline coming? No. He thought about this. Is she allowed to make me go with her? Eleanor looked down at him. She had made a decision, somewhere over the last hour, that she would not do to Thomas what every other adult in his life was doing to him, which was to hand him a comfortable story instead of the truth. He was 8. He had just lost both parents. He deserved to be treated as though his mind was worth something. She's going to try, Eleanor said. She's going to ask a judge to say you should live with her instead of me, and she might have some good reasons from the outside. She has a big house and a garden, and I have a small flat and a job that keeps me up at night. So it might look, to a judge, like she's the better choice. Thomas's face did the thing again, the going still. But, Eleanor said, I'm going to fight it. And I want you to know 2 things, and I want you to remember them even on the days when I look like I'm losing. The first thing is that I am not going to lie to you. Not ever. Not to make you feel better, not to make myself feel better. If you ask me a question, I'll tell you the true answer, or I'll tell you I can't tell you yet. All right. He nodded slowly. The second thing, she said, is that your Aunt Caroline made a mistake this morning. She thinks she knows what I am. She doesn't. And by the time she finds out, it's going to be too late for her to do anything about it. What are you? Thomas asked. And Eleanor Vance, cleaner, night shift, 4-pound umbrella, looked out at the rain and said, someone they should have looked at harder. The flat was on the 3rd floor of a converted Victorian house on a street of converted Victorian houses, and it was, as Caroline had said, 1 bedroom. What Caroline had not known, because Caroline had not looked, was that Eleanor had given the bedroom to Idea long before she had a child to give it to. She unlocked the door and led Thomas down the narrow hall and opened the bedroom door, and the boy stopped in the doorway. The room was small and clean and entirely his. A bed made up with a duvet cover printed with the solar system, a shelf of books at a child's height, a lamp shaped like a rocket, a desk under the window with a jar of pencils and a stack of blank paper, and propped against the wall, a framed photograph of Daniel and Margaret laughing on a beach, a photograph Thomas had never seen, because Eleanor had asked Margaret for it 8 months ago, and Margaret had sent it, and neither of them had said out loud the thing they were both preparing for. You knew, Thomas said. You knew I was going to come. I hoped you wouldn't have to, Eleanor said. It would have meant your mum and dad were still. She stopped. She had promised not to lie. I set it up in case, because your mum asked me to be the person if anything ever happened, and when someone asks you to be the person, you get ready, even if you pray you never need to be. Thomas walked into the room. He touched the rocket lamp. He looked at the photograph for a long time. And then, without any warning at all, he began to cry. Not the polite, contained crying he'd done at the funeral with 100 adults watching, but the real thing, the huge and ugly grief of a child who had been holding it in a fist for 2 weeks, because no one had given him a room small enough and safe enough to let it out in. Eleanor sat down on the floor with her back against his new bed and did not tell him it would be all right. She did not tell him his parents were angels. She simply opened her arms, and he came into them, and she held her sister's son while he shook, and outside the rain kept falling, and somewhere in Surrey a woman named Caroline Ashworth was on the phone to a solicitor saying the words unfit and unstable and only reasonable outcome, and she had no idea, none at all, that she had just started a fight with the one person in England she should have left alone.